census?
The census is a special time when we count every single person in the country.
Do kids and babies count too?
Of course, counting everyone in your home helps support your neighborhood by funding schools, hospitals, and more. So complete the census by calling, going online, or returning your form by mail. It's totally private.
Visit 2020census.gov and
Make your family count!
Brought to you by Carnegie Corporation of New York and the Ad Council.
In the late 60s and 70s, America was moving toward an era of peace, love, and harmony. But not everyone got the memo. The founding fathers of Columbus hockey traded protests for penalty minutes, Woodstock for wood sticks, and sit-ins for sin bins. Give peace a chance? Not a chance. Menacing, merciless, and mustachioed, this band of goal scorers and gladiators put Columbus on course to discover a whole new game. Old-time hockey? These guys hold the patent. For more than a decade, Ohio's capital city was at the center of some of hockey's most intriguing international incidents. A film chronicling Columbus's teams of the International Hockey League. Facing Off 2020.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
All right, everybody, get your popcorn ready because this is going to be a fun one. This is Good Seats Still Available, of course, your trusty little weekly show that is devoted to what used to be in professional sports. My name is Tim Hanlon. Thank you for finding us and downloading us and putting us into your earbuds. We appreciate you doing so, and we appreciate you tuning in for this fun-filled episode as we go back to minor league hockey. Again, we try not to do too much in the minor leagues, but I tell you, we do generate a whole bunch of inbounds, and our episode 169 was probably among our more recently popular shows. It was the Columbus Chill episode that we did with our pals David Paitson and Craig Merz, who regaled us in the 1990s exploits of a minor league hockey team in Columbus, Ohio, known as the Chill, which kind of took not only the Columbus, Ohio market, but also that of professional sports and minor league sports specifically by storm in terms of the standout promotional nature and the buzz generated in a town at the time in the early and mid 1990s, which was bereft of anything really hockey-centric. Strange as it might seem, because Ohio, obviously a pretty strong hockey hotbed, and Lord knows there have been many attempts over the decades to domicile some professional goodness around hockey in the Buckeye State. Cincinnati, a couple of cups of coffee with like the Cincinnati Stingers of the WHA, and Cleveland having both a WHA franchise in the 70s, as well as the Barons of the NHL. The WHA version, of course, was the Cleveland Crusaders, I think it was. Yes, it was. So, but that said, right, these are teams that have come and gone or came and went. And Columbus kind of sort of had the same thing, but more on the minor league level. And we've talked about Columbus, Ohio as now a major league sports market, obviously with the Columbus Crew SC of Major League Soccer, the Columbus Magic of the American Soccer League. You remember them, the Columbus Clippers, certainly in minor league baseball, we've talked about. But of course now too, probably the biggest example thus far is the Columbus Blue Jackets of the NHL. Well, we knew from our previous episode that the Chill were pretty much the sort of the pavement, if you will, the grounding, the foundation, the immediate predecessor, not only of the team, the Blue Jackets, but the arena in which they're domiciled too. But as you might remember, that episode 169, we did talk about what was before even the Chill, and if you remember, there was a pretty substantial gap. I think the Chill started, I want to say, in 1991, 1992 or so. There were, count them, 3 minor league, International Hockey League teams in Columbus that ran from, I guess it was 1966 as the original Columbus Checkers, In 1971, a rehabbed team after a year departure from 71 to 73, the Columbus Golden Seals said yes, they were related to the California Golden Seals that we've talked about on a number of different episodes previously. And then from 74 to 77, that team became known as the Columbus Owls. Those are three franchises in the IHL that preceded the Chill. However, a gap from 77 to 91 kind of was an indication that maybe Columbus just wasn't ready, either at the time or maybe ever, for a professional hockey franchise, minor league at any level or major league for that matter at all. But this is sort of the continuing story, I guess, the last sort of piece of what is that we've now stumbled into, the professional hockey history of Columbus, Ohio, that, obviously resides in the Blue Jackets today. But I got to tell you, these three logos and these three teams, if the Blue Jackets, in addition to the Chill, by the way, don't pay homage to these teams, well, I'll tell you, there's something grossly out of whack in terms of the foundations laid by these franchises that we're going to be talking about today with our guest, Eric Weltner, as we get into the International Hockey League of the 60s and 70s, and in particular, the three franchises, let's call them all distinct franchises, or at least incarnations, in Columbus, they being the Checkers, the Golden Seals, and the Owls. And as you will see, if you haven't seen already in our social media this week or on our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com, just search up this episode. The logos and the imagery and the graphic design of these three franchises are just absolutely fantastic. Unfortunately, we have no sponsors this week that have any of these jerseys or these shirts or these logos in their wares. But I got to tell you, there are some out there. We highly encourage you to search them up, seek them out. And they're just fantastic. The Checkers stuff with, as you can imagine, the name, the checkerboards, the Golden Seals, of course, we know the iconography from that, from our previous episodes about the NHL version. Yes, this was the minor league farm team for those 2 or 3 years, owned by Charlie Finley. We get into that part of the conversation. And the Owls, it's just arguably something that could live on today. Not dated at all, very modern and a sleek-looking iconography that sort of blends, of course, what you would imagine an owl to look like with that of a crest of a hockey team. All of them fascinating to no end. We don't want to necessarily obsess about artwork here on this show, but it's fantastic stuff. And if you haven't seen them, search up, either on Google or wherever you find good imagery online, and you will be delighted to see both the Checkers, the Golden Seals, and the Owls imagery. And we're happy to bring those back into the fore with our guest again this week, Eric Weltner. He, the writer, the producer, the director, the chief cook and bottle washer for the movie that you heard the teaser for there at the beginning called International Incidents. It is a film. It's he calls it 80 minutes of old-time hockey gold. It debuts on October 15th on Vimeo. And we'll give you some more promotional goodness about how to see that for yourself. It's coming up in a couple of weeks as we drop this episode. It's a hoot. We've had the opportunity to see it ahead of time, and it's great stuff. And we get into all of it with Eric Weltner in just a few moments' time. Please stick around for fun minor league hockey. If you ever watched Slapshot, the great iconic movie, well, I got to tell you, a lot of what went on in Columbus in the International Hockey League was very much, very closely related to a lot of the stuff that you see in that film. So if you're a fan of Slapshot, you will be a fan of this episode and this documentary about the various Columbus International Hockey League teams coming up in a moment's time. Before we do so, we want to say hello to our brand new sponsor this week, our pal Judd Lasher, who is the chief proprietor of our friends at 417 Helmets. That's 417helmets.com or 417helmets.com, whichever you prefer. A fantastic site, and we appreciate Judd reaching out. if you are just into the sport of football and you love to commemorate teams both currently as well as those of yore, you could do worse than to stop by 417helmets.com. And yes, you're going to find mini helmets, lovingly crafted, a hobby turned amazing professional site for great imagery. If you want to remember some of your favorite football teams from, certainly the NFL and the NCAA, and even some, smaller collegiates like the NAIA and some of their teams. But how about teams from the USFL or the XFL or the WFL, or how about the World League of American Football, maybe some of the CFL, both past and present. There are some high school helmets commemorated there too, and many more. If you want your own custom helmet made, Judd and his friends at 417helmets.com can do you good for all of those things and more. It's a great assortment of mini helmets. They are done to perfection. The colors, the logos, all done with painstaking accuracy and the highest quality materials that go into them. They are a great gift for any football fan in your life, or maybe for yourself, for that matter. And if you want to get a great mini helmet to commemorate an old team, celebrate a current team, or maybe even custom make one for a team that's either not been made, or maybe there's just one is conjuring up in your head, 417helmets.com is the place to go. And of course, we would not introduce a new sponsor to this endeavor without a discount code. Of course, the promo code for you there is Good Seats. Yes, at 417helmets.com. Make sure you use the promo code Good Seats and get 10% off all of your great helmets at 417helmets.com. Thank you, Judd, and thank you for giving them a try. We appreciate their new sponsorship to our little show, and we'll look forward to highlighting some more great stuff from 417helmets.com in the weeks and months to come for sure. But for now, we put the football helmetry aside and we get back into hockey and a minor league style of hockey. It's the International Hockey League and the three, count them, teams that skated through Columbus, Ohio back in the 60s and early 1970s. Here we go. Here's our chat with Eric Weltner, a conversation we had just a few weeks back. And get ready, please. Enjoy. You must have been among the surprisingly large number that listened to our episode 169 with David Paitson and Craig Merz on the Columbus Chill, because here we are again talking about minor league hockey. Again, something we don't necessarily look for stories in the quote unquote minor leagues, because Lord knows there's enough in the major leagues as well as the major challenger leagues to keep us going perhaps for a couple of lifetimes. But, we like good stories, and especially, teams that made a go at it for whatever reasons and then are no longer around. And we learned pretty quickly in the Columbus Chill story that there was absolutely this minor league hockey thing of substance in Columbus that was a thing for some time, and then just almost seemingly overnight kind of just disappeared and lay fallow or no longer until the Chill came back in the 90s. So I guess before we sort of get into that story, who are you and why is this story of interest to you? And maybe a little background on all that.
I am Eric Weltner, and I grew up in the suburb of Columbus, Ohio called Gahanna, which was just a few miles east of downtown. And I grew up loving hockey, and especially got really turned on by the Columbus Owls, who were the third team of the triumvirate that played in the IHL at the historic Fairgrounds Coliseum. And I just embraced them as far as my team, because in Columbus, we didn't have what we would call major league sports. Now, the city was not unfamiliar with major sports when we had the Archie Griffin winning back-to-back Heismans, and there were some national championships, and Woody Hayes and his fame and his infamy. So, big sports were there. They just weren't under the major league professional moniker. And so when the Owls came about and I got interested in the sport and the game, and my friend introduced me to the Owls in particular, it just seemed like something that I loved. And they were my squad at that point. So I followed them closely and just had a real liking for them. I read every box score in the morning and begged my parents to take me as much as possible. And they just got into my blood.
So this is not a new sort of reason or adjunct for stories like this. As many listeners of this show have long and overwrought heard me talk about, my entree to this sort of weird fascination of teams and leagues no longer with came from my interest in a sport, the sport of soccer and the New York Cosmos. And obviously soccer fans will know the Columbus Magic were a thing for a year or two. But it's not a surprise, right? It's an impressionable time in one's life, especially if you're sort of the young, sort of stereotypical all-American male who's interested in sports and stuff, right? And you kind of look around and sort of see, hey, what's around and you know, things to go do and see, and sports is absolutely one of them. But you're describing Columbus as not sort of the, shall we say, most fertile of quote unquote professional sports domains.
That is correct. Yeah, we didn't have major league professional. We'd had a lot of professional, entities. As you mentioned, soccer, we had some minor league basketball and football and all of that. But most of the sports dollars and time on the newscasts went to the Ohio State Buckeyes, whether that was football or basketball or football. It was that intense. So pretty much everybody else who came in took a distant second place, except for in the summer, the Columbus Clippers, which were tremendous and still are a tremendous AAA affiliation back then with the New York Yankees. And George Steinbrenner was very kind to Columbus and spent a lot of money on the team and the facilities there. So that was in the summer, but otherwise it was basketball and football primarily.
Yes, in an episode that we had with Dave Herman, we talked about the what we call the Almost Yankees of 1981, where basically that there was an elevation almost, frankly, to major league status, somewhat clandestinely, because they were quite the thing when Major League Baseball went on strike, and the Clippers were essentially kind of stocked with and aided and abetted by the Yankees' parent organization. But I digress. Let me get into, or maybe you can set the table for the Owls, right, which is kind of, I want to say the end of this story, but the beginning of yours. And maybe you can kind of give a sense of how that sort of went, and then maybe how we go backwards and forwards accordingly.
Yeah, I'll just sort of link this with a conduit here. The Owls were the third team of the four professional IHL squads that came through Columbus, and that was the one that I was involved with most. And since I did like them so much and I loved the game so much, I was just crestfallen as a 12-year-old when they left town. And I was like, all right, what are we going to do now? We don't have hockey, and it's my favorite sport. And I really related to a lot of the players because they were so approachable. They would come see us. My mom would take my friend Leo and me to practices on days off, like on maybe President's Day or something. We would go to the rink, and they would just come around and give us the broken sticks and sign autographs and whatever, and just be very welcoming to us. So we just thought they were the greatest. And so when they went away, and I went through high school and college and all that, I played, and I played, but not terribly well. But I played, and I still continued to love it and pursue it in other avenues. But we just didn't have a team. So then you covered the Chill with Craig and David, and that was a whole new flavor. That was a 13-year hiatus, I believe, and then they came to town, and they just sort of blew the top off with all of their promotions and everything, and tapped into the youth market and marketed the game differently than what it had been back in the 60s and 70s when the Checkers, Golden Seals, and Owls were taking a run. But there were hockey fans in Columbus. So there were those fans as well that were there for the taking. So they tapped into them, but then they tapped into other audiences. But what I wanted to tell the story of when I made this movie, International Incidents, was the fact that there were teams there before the Chill. The Chill get all the headlines, but these guys who were really good players, especially when you consider the era in which they played, were almost like just vaporizing into the cosmos. There was nothing to be found about the Checkers, the Golden Seals, or the Owls, unless you talk to somebody of a certain age and they'd say, "Oh yeah, I remember going in there. That was fun. We had a great time." And that was kind of it. There were no stories or photos in bars or books or any kind of commemorative items or anything that celebrated those teams. And I just thought, wow, it's a major league city with an NHL team now. And I just think it would be unacceptable for all those guys who came through and really blazed the trail for pro hockey in Columbus to not be recognized in some capacity.
Yeah, and that's something we talked about with the guys about the Chill, because and it's great that we can sort of even go further back, because it does get into one of the areas that we sort of obsess about. Sort of is sort of that, let's call it foundational history that either gets wallpapered over or just out and out forgotten. Usually because there isn't necessarily any economics immediately attached to it in modern terms, right? So the NHL and the Blue Jackets probably would generally say, okay, well, we can't sort of fully appropriate the Owls or the Golden Seals or the Checkers history, or the Chill for that matter, either because we can't sort of access maybe the logos or make money off of those kinds of things, or frankly, maybe we just don't want to remember what the leaner times, shall we say, or the minor leagueness of what Columbus was in the past, right? So there's probably a whole host of reasons, and I've frankly never talked to anybody on the Blue Jackets staff or the NHL specifically about this, or generally about why not remember some of these teams, because this is the foundation upon which Columbus ultimately became a major league city for the NHL.
Yeah, and that was sort of my quest. I had gone to some Blue Jackets games, and boy, their facility is fantastic, by the way, if you have not been, the Nationwide Arena. And I know a couple of times they did, historical things. I know a couple of the former players at one point got recognized as, here are some of the original players from the long ago and the far away. And I went one night and it was Celebrate Ohio Hockey History Night. So I wore my old jacket and stuff and tried to, fit into things that I could no longer fit into. But just do things like that, do commemorative activities like that. But they never really embraced the Owls and the Golden Seals and the Checkers as part of the family, I guess I would say. They were just sort of this forgotten history. And okay, we had the Chill, and the Chill was really instrumental in getting the community arena built. And then a few other things happened, and boom, they got the Blue Jackets through.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean,
some shrewd business dealings.
Yeah, and they were probably the most immediate, setup, I guess, for what ultimately became the Blue Jackets franchise. But I think what you're kind of getting at is that even despite there was a gap between their existence and the IHL's teams that we're going to get into even more in a minute, and that's all part of the tableau of history of hockey fans in Columbus, which, frankly, without any of those, you could make the very strong argument that the Blue Jackets would not be a franchise as they are today in the NHL.
Yeah, that's correct. And Columbus has grown since the Checkers, Seals, and Owls were there, too. It was not a small city to begin with, because one of the mantles it wore for a long time was the largest city and metropolitan market in the USA to not have a major league sports franchise. So, there were people there, there were consumer dollars there, and there were hockey fans there. Now, I'm not going to tell you that they have a sellout every day, but they did have some pretty hardcore fans. And then if they were playing well and if they were marketed well, which is another story, they'd get 4,500, 5,500 into the barn. And that was about as much as you could hold. So there were people there who craved the game and were willing to spend their Tuesday nights in the old barn and watch some hockey.
Well, describe to me, maybe through the lens of your childhood and the Owls at the time, and maybe just as also a scene setter for the three incarnations that we'll get into. The I don't know, the overshadowing, I guess, of Columbus by both Cincinnati and Cleveland in their, I don't know, inelegant attempts to be Major League Hockey cities themselves, largely through the WHA. Like, how much were you aware of that in your fandom of the Owls, and or were you not aware? And maybe in as you sort of did your research for this this film, how much did that have an effect on perhaps why Columbus wasn't one of the chosen markets either for the WHA or for the longest time the NHL even?
Yeah, now I was mostly aware of the Stingers in the WHA just because our family has some ties to the city of Cincinnati. My father went to school down here to finish up, and then my sister eventually did too. But and plus they were on TV, and the Barons had kind of come and gone, and they left with a whimper. So that was really never a presence. But one of the things that happened to Columbus in the, I loved your word, inelegant attempts of getting an NHL team was the fact that you were right smack dab in the middle of Detroit, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Indianapolis, and Cincinnati. And we were all very similar sized cities, probably Detroit a lot bigger at the time. And then that was it. So you could only fight for so many dollars. And then there was always the appeal that, Cleveland or Cincinnati, they were a little bit of a bigger, more established already major league market. So maybe we'll go there. And Columbus always got bypassed that way, is what it seemed. And that was even true of other entertainment options with concerts and art and things like that.
So this sort of this Columbus has always sort of had this, this inferiority complex in some respects, right? Which I think is even more interesting. Well, there are a couple of different interesting tangents here. I mean, we'll get to the Golden Seals and them going to Cleveland to become the Barons for 2 years and the end of their natural life. We'll get to that in a second. But in essence, it's really interesting the fact that the NHL is ultimately domiciled in Columbus after all of those attempts, both WHA and NHL elsewhere in the state of Ohio, to finally land there.
Yes, it's incredibly interesting. And one factor that was always at work was there is still currently a very strong faction of, we don't want any money to go away from the beloved Ohio State Buckeyes, period. There were efforts at all times and in all quarters trying to quell any march toward major league status if that were going to compete with or take funds away from the beloved Scarlet and Gray. So there were those dealings at work in the back rooms and the undercurrents as well. So that was tough to overcome, because unless you've lived in Columbus or maybe a place like Austin, Texas, it's hard to comprehend the power and money that sits with a university like that.
Yeah, and I don't want to obsess too much on the Blue Jackets, because I do want to get into this IHL story. But did that change when the Crew and Major League Soccer came about in '96, or was that? It feels to me like they kind of broke at least a couple of blocks off of that wall to maybe make the Blue Jackets' entree via the NHL a little bit easier. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that would be fair, because Mr. Hunt was so respected in the professional sports business that I think that brought some credibility. And it was like, soccer, okay, that doesn't really compete a whole lot, but I think it did give them some legs and some credibility. And the city was growing, the market was growing, and that got some energy. And then Mr. Karmanos wanted to bring the Whalers there, but the city defeated the stadium levy at one point. So he was like, all right, we're going to Carolina. And then Dave and Craig would be your more knowledgeable people on how the Blue Jackets actually came. But, I think it was a civic and private business operation or I don't want to say collusion, that has negative connotations, but a joint effort to build the stadium. And Mr. McConnell then said, I will front the money for the team if you can get a stadium built. And then those two worked together, and that's how that came about. And Bettman was on board, and it kind of happened in spite of itself, really. I was living in Detroit at the time, so I was in a major league NHL market, having also lived in St. Louis. So I saw how it worked. I saw how good it could be as well.
Well, let's dig into sort of the foundations then of this, because, you know, upon the backs of what we're going to talk about is really where some of this current history obviously lives and maybe should live, and we've already assessed the fact that it shouldn't be forgotten, and maybe a little show like this can be a little bit of an inspiration, perhaps, to, because Lord knows the Owls logos, for example, and is a great. It's probably it's a really well done logo, and that there's probably maybe there's money to be made there, but it's certainly at least something graphically that could be remembered relatively easily. Maybe a little bit of a sense of what this IHL was back in the 70s, because I think that's maybe also a good primer for the three iterations that we're going to talk about, not just the Owls, but the Seals and the Checkers.
Right. So yeah, and that's a couple of there are a couple of interesting factors too. So the Checkers came about. That was the first franchise that came, and that was in 1966. So think about 1966. That was still Original Six. So you had your other minor leagues. You had your AHL and your Western, who were probably pretty much the developmental leagues. And then you had the Eastern and the Central and such, who also had room for some really good players, and there were multiple affiliations. So a lot of good players would go to those leagues for whatever reason, whether it was contract ownership or you were a free agent, and oftentimes you could actually make more money in one league versus another. So, you know, I had one player who I interviewed saying, I was just happy to get a job playing pro hockey. And that told me a lot, that there were so few jobs for so many guys trying to play the pro game. So one of the things that struck me was going through my research is at some point in the 10 seasons that they had the IHL teams there were 27 men who either who'd played in the NHL either prior to their arrival in Columbus or thereafter. So there were some quality players, and a lot more even played in the WHA. So there were some quality guys pulling on the sweater for those three teams.
Well, so that's interesting, and we're recording this the week that we dropped our little mini episode with Dennis Murphy, the founder of the WHA, and you know, there's no question that, and I think it's really important that you circle around this, right? The Great Expansion wasn't until 1967, right, and the WHA shortly thereafter, right? So, in many respects, and we've talked about this with a lot of people, the NHL was way behind, I guess, where, you know, other sports had already started to either create a challenger league or recognize that expansion had to happen much more quickly because there was a big fat country out there that was ready for new sports product. The fact, you know, and I was born in 65, right? And so I was unconscious, frankly, about all of this, but at the time, you know, the fact that there were only 6 hockey franchises for the longest time since the 40s, and until the late 60s, really hadn't, you know, and then doubling in size. I mean, even then it was still, but it was hard to believe. And the fact that the IHL and the WHA recognized that, I think, is all part of the historical importance of this conversation, because, you know, there was absolutely probably more quality players, Canada included, that could be populating more than just 6 teams on a top-tier professional league level.
Yeah, that's for sure. Columbus, these teams and most of the IHL were made up. Those teams were made up of primarily Canadians by about, I'd say, probably 90%. We had a few Americans and not really even very many Europeans that played. So, yeah, they were just looking for a place to play. And they were affiliated, you know, these teams that I'm talking about, they were affiliated with at different times with the Blackhawks and the Blues and the Bruins. So the Penguins even at one point. So, yeah, these guys were really, really good players who were worth paying to play. And also, they were trying to traverse their way into the show by any means possible.
Well, describe to me, based on what you going back in time, right? The how the Checkers kind of came to be in '66, because you've already set the tone here, right? That there's hockey marketness here. There's certainly a dearth of it at the top tier pro level, and this IHL, I'm guessing had a fairly sort of rough and tumble sort of a definition to it in terms of its the quality of play and then the ferocity of it, and I guess maybe why Columbus and how a Columbus franchise gets finally domiciled after, frankly, being written off as a college town for the longest time.
Right. Indeed, there was ferocity in that league as far as the play, but the play was also good. But you did have to bring your big boy game every night. But how the Checkers came about is pretty interesting, because I know you have in the past like to talk about a lot of the pro team, the major league teams and all of that. Well, there were three brothers from Cleveland named Ray, Larry, and Jerry Schmeltzer, who were an eyelash away from purchasing the Boston Celtics. And I found articles about that and everything. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And they said, no, we got backdoor dealed right at the very end and outbid by a little bit. So we lost. We didn't get it. And I was, thinking, wow, that would be pretty nice to own the Celtics now, which are multi-billion-dollar franchise. But anyway,
yeah, you bet. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, pretty incredible. So word got out that they were looking to own a sports franchise. And so they and the IHL talked, and they formed this, entity and made a pitch and got accepted into the league, and then started the team in 1966. And these guys were young. The Schmelzer guys were young to be taking this on. So it was pretty impressive. And one remained, kind of like as the day-to-day GM, but they didn't really have hockey experience, and I don't think they really had any sports acumen either. So they just built this thing from the ground up, but they, in a lot of ways, did it right. They spent a lot of money to put proper ice into the Fairgrounds Coliseum, which was the home arena, which still stands today, but was also, when people refer to it as a barn, it literally is used as a barn a lot, because they have the state fair there, they have bull riding, and this giant event that's there every fall, the quarter horse convention, was housed there. So it literally was a barn at times and needed a lot of ice making upgrades and an ice plant and all that. So they spent a ton of money just to get that thing started. And why Columbus and why, say, the IHL, given that they were that close to kind of owning, a top franchise in a top professional league in basketball? Did you get any sense of that? Yeah, they in talking with Jerry, who just unfortunately passed away last summer, he just said that they wanted to be in the sports business in some capacity. And this was an opportunity for them to do that, as well as make additional business connections in another market, since they were in Cleveland. And that was one thing that he told me. He said, despite how the whole chapter of the Checkers ownership ended up for us, we still made more connections there than we would have otherwise. And we still have business relationships and make money in Columbus to this day because of the Checkers ownership. So I just think it was some shrewd thinking, I guess, on their part is what it was. They just wanted to own a team and saw this as an opportunity in a city that didn't have that.
Well,
and really didn't have a challenger.
Yeah, and maybe because they also recognize too, like we just described, right? There was probably too few professional top tier franchises in the NHL, and then maybe something more was to come, and obviously the great expansion in the WHA to follow. Whether they kind of knew that or had inklings, or maybe recognized that perhaps their a foray into the top tier minor league might actually yield into something. But so the fairgrounds, right? We kind of talked about this in the Coliseum. We kind of talked about this a little bit with the Chill guys. But do I have this right that the debut of this team sort of didn't go over well because they wanted to bring in the Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. You're laughing.
Yeah. Yeah. It was pretty dubious. It was great on paper because they were able to get the Chicago Blackhawks to come play a game there, and that was when they had Makita and Bobby Hull. So that was you didn't get any bigger than that, right? And so they had to hurriedly, because of that quarter horse show that I mentioned, hurriedly build the ice. Well, they get there for the game, and the ice is not good. And some players refused, Blackhawks to even refuse to play because they found it to be too treacherous. So they had a little confab and decided they would play somewhat of a game with a running clock and avoid injury for everybody. So, yeah, that was how it started, and that facility itself just never really was able to get out of its own way as far as being a credible hockey host building.
Well, describe to me, though, it became somewhat, I don't know, of an advantage and or semi-charming over time, but how many seasons did the Checkers last, and is there any, can you kind of describe kind of what those, I guess it was 4 seasons, were like for the team? Because obviously it didn't end well. We could get to that in a second, but it obviously tried to make a go out of it. I'm just curious as to what the dynamic of games there and or not only on the ice, but the fan experience, any of that kind of stuff that you can kind of discern from your research for this film.
Yeah, sure. Well, they right out of the gates, they signed some good free agents and some, pretty decent level minor league players. And then the real coup was to lure Edward Mo Bartoli in as the playing coach. And he had been a long time EHL player and a very good one, and as well played in the IHL. And he was a Sudbury guy. And Mo was just a huge personality, bombastic, loud, loved to play hard, and expected that of all of his teams, and just made it fun for the fans to watch, and made it miserable for the opponents, because it's just the way he played and the way he coached is his teams were always known for just being hard in the corners, hard on the boards. And a couple of years in a row, they set IHL penalty minute records for the season, as well as individual games and such. So, I mean, they were a tough bunch of cusses to go up against.
How did the market receive them? I'm guessing not all that tremendously well or enthusiastically, or maybe they did, and it just didn't. Why it only lasted 4 seasons, I guess, is the question.
They did. It was enthusiastically embraced, actually, because Columbus and Ohio being such heavy-duty football markets, they loved the aggression and the speed and the fisticuffs and all of that. But part and parcel with that, with the building itself, is they always had really terrible scheduling. They would get kicked out of the building for, the boat and fishing show. And then what really hurt, and this hurt everybody along the line, even up back to the Chill, when they reappeared in the 90s, was they would lose the building. They would lose the building for the playoffs due to other events, primarily high school basketball.
Well, there was also, if I remember correctly with our Chill conversation, also a bit of, I don't know, not necessarily just scheduling, but sort of, I want to say undermining perhaps of dates, given, I'm guessing, the long arm of Ohio State sports too, even though this isn't necessarily a direct competition with Ohio State sports, but maybe it was, right? With the basketball team being probably the number 2 sport in the Ohio State sort of universe, and I'm guessing also hockey too on the collegiate level. is it fair to say that there was a little there's no better word I can think of, is undermining perhaps in deference to Ohio State so as not to be competitive with?
It wasn't necessarily that. The state did run the Coliseum. The Coliseum sat literally on the fairgrounds, and so it was managed by the state. But they also had these long-standing dates, which, is the bane of all minor league buildings, even still to this day. So when they would have the sport and travel show want to come in for 2 or 3 weeks, they got it because they were there, in years prior. And then when the High School Basketball Association wanted to have their playoffs there at the same time that the hockey team would have been, well, they got it for a month or 5 weeks. You guys got to go find another home. They also lost a lot of dates on weekends, which was also hard to grow a really strong following because they would have circus or bull riding or concerts or tractor pulls in that building. So they were never, none of the teams were ever like the primary tenant, I guess. They were never thought of as the A number one, you get priority tenant, because the other things I think just made more money. And isn't that always what it's about?
Well, I guess so. But again, hockey, IHL. I mean, it's also, it seems to me, kind of Columbus's, aside from the Clippers and baseball, and I don't remember off the top of my head if the CBA was a thing in the late 60s yet in Columbus either. It was kind of really their only pro, go around aside from, again, that big dark shadow of Ohio State sports, which effectively in that town, right? It still was. Ohio State, whoever came in, you competed against Ohio State. If it was the fall, it was football. If it was the winter, it was basketball. And there you have it. Plus, Ohio and Columbus in particular is also very devoted high school sports following city too. High school basketball and wrestling and football were very big. So those are other competitive ventures that the hockey teams had to go up against. So there were a lot of things that sort of conspired against their success in a lot of ways. Well, I guess the Checkers also didn't do all that well on the ice either. It wasn't a whole lot of reason aside from, maybe curiosity or maybe even the logo and the once again, the Owls, iconography is lovely, frankly, and charming. The Columbus the crest and the coloring is also graphically very very appealing. But I'm sure that's not a reason to go out to the ice and watch Mo and the boys go at it, right? They didn't make they only made the playoffs in the first round twice, and their general they only finished over 500 one season, right? So memorable. They were not great as far as a team, but they were entertaining because of their bloodlust, I guess. There was a great line by one of their general managers the first year is in describing Mo Bartoli and how infamous he was in the league. When the GM said Mo was the only one booed at the All-Star game. So it goes to tell you how universally loathed they were as a team within the league. That's interesting. So then, but why? I get the sense that the brothers kind of, for whatever reason, couldn't make a business go out of it too. I mean, for all the excitement and or the pugnaciousness, I guess, if that's a word, of the team, and then it doesn't seem like it was enough to not only stand out as something just fun to go see and watch, but obviously the performance on the ice didn't help. Why and how does it sort of segue away? Because if I have this right, the team basically is done after the fourth season. This is not a continuation when we get to these other two incarnations. It died. Yeah?
Yeah. So in the third year, the beloved Mo Bartoli was traded, and he was still acting as player coach. And people got hacked off about that because he was the guy. He was the voice. He was the face. He was and he was a very good player. He's still an all-star level player. And so that really made the natives mad. So that had some impact. And then they brought in another coach who, the last name might mean something to you, for the fourth year, Mo Mantha, whose son eventually coached the Columbus Chill later down the way. I believe that was his son. And that was their fourth year. So the Schmeltzers had enough of running this minor league team. And so they had a deal in place at one point in the fourth season with an entity out of Illinois, I believe. And the deal fell through at the end, and it became this major litigation. And then finally, I think they just said, enough, we're going to punt. And they did not bring the deposit to the league for a fourth season or a fifth season. And then the league just withdrew the franchise. So the team was dissolved. The Schmeltzers got nothing. And the International Hockey League just reacquired the franchise.
So the Schmeltzers kind of just they just retreated. What else? What do they do afterwards? I mean, they just wrote it off as a loss. Did they go else to other sports enterprises? I'm frankly
they didn't.
Ignorant.
No, they went back to Cleveland and excelled in real estate and public relations ventures. So
interesting.
That was So
Boston Celtics jilted at the altar. 4 years in Columbus in minor league hockey, and that's it.
That's it. Let's go.
So much for tenacity in this franchise, huh?
Right. Well, like I said, initially, they were pretty young guys. I just think maybe they were just trying it. And you even indicated that maybe if we try this and we get some experience, and maybe we can have a shot at a major league franchise in this sport or another one. But I don't think Jerry was even 30 by the time they were packing up and going home to Cleveland.
Well, do I have this right? The other Jerry involved in this, the operations manager at the fairgrounds, Jerry Kaltenbach. Do I have this right? He basically kind of either out of auction or somehow furtively commandeered the equipment and that kind of stuff on the bet that maybe someday somebody would then again come back and try hockey again?
Yeah, well, I believe they kept it all there because then for the second team, that's when the circus came to town in the form of Charles O. Finley.
All right, well, let's talk about that then, right? All right, so basically,
yes, let's.
Number one, it's important, I guess, in our little sort of silly genre to understand that this is not a continuation of the original franchise. This is really kind of a second incarnation of such, because the team did stop in 70 and then came, was it 70? Let me make sure I get my dates right here. Stopped at the end of the 1969-70 season and then didn't start again in their new incarnation as the Golden Seals in 1971. So there was a year without hockey at the IHL level. So, all right, so let's talk about this. We've had a number of conversations. Matter of fact, our very first one with our pal Mark Gretschmiller was a great sport in exceeding to being our first ever episode way back when.
Oh, wow, yeah. I've watched his movie. It's really cool.
There you go, on the Golden Seals. And then we had and Steve Currier on a subsequent episode later on. I am fascinated, always have been, with the Golden Seals NHL franchise, part of the Great Expansion. Don't call them California, don't call them Oakland, don't call them Golden, whatever. Who knows? There are different names and iterations. But Charlie Finley, right, was part of that mix at some point in that franchises. So set that story up for me, because we all know about Charlie Finley, but why a minor league Golden Seals, and why Columbus, and why would Charlie Finley even care about sort of Columbus to do this?
Oh, so many good questions there. Well, so the city was without a team, and because that deal all fell apart so late in 1970, the IHL didn't feel like they could get another team up and running to take over that franchise. So they just kept it and absorbed it and had it on the market. Well, Charlie Finley, who did own the NHL Golden Seals at the time, decided he was going to buy it and use it as a developmental team for his hockey empire. And boy, did that sound promising back in the day. You know, you have this major league owner who's building World Series champions and such, and owns another NHL team. This has got to be great, doesn't it? So
Well, so before you go any further, I'm assuming that the IHL was essentially the AAA, I guess, or a AAA play for the NHL. And I'm also guessing, correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't mean to divert you here, that there might have been some, I don't know, financial advantage here, because here we had a dormant franchise in the IHL, and I guess they were, I would say, priced to move, but were attractive financially. But that's just my guess.
Yeah, he got a good deal on the Seals, to be sure, because he was just buying them directly from the league. But no, they were not necessarily, and that's, a discussion that some people would like to have, is the IHL was probably not actual AAA. It was probably AAA minus or AA plus. If you were really on the way to go up to the NHL, you're either going to be playing probably in the American Hockey League or the Western League. So
okay, that helps frame it a little bit better.
Yeah.
Still,
but some of those teams, as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, some of those teams didn't always have roster spots for everybody that they owned. So they would say, okay, you go to Columbus, and had some pretty darn good players. In fact, a lot of the players, despite their absolute abysmal futility, quite a few guys did make it to the NHL in some capacity with that Golden Seals operation. So yeah, the circus came to town in 1971 with Charlie leading the parade.
And the idea was what? I need a minor league franchise to stock and or have to either send players down and or develop talent to bring up.
Yeah, that was it. They also operated a team in Salt Lake, I believe, the Golden Eagles. I know they did at least for one season, and so they were kind of the AAA call-up squad. So they did need to shelve some players elsewhere, and so they would send them to Columbus. And they brought in a former NHL player to be the coach, a young, energetic guy, Terry Gray, and there were all kinds of hopes. But man, they were historically bad. Well, it was also loaded with I guess you would call them sort of raw prospects and young players, right? So it didn't seem like there were any quote unquote stars or any real commitment, perhaps, to being necessarily competitive, because I think it's also important to remember that the NHL Seals were also relatively young as well, right? This is an expansion franchise circa 67, right? So this was not a team that had been around for a long time. But I guess Finley was also kind of in a hurry, right? He wanted to make things happen and relatively fast for the pro team, the top tier team versus, I don't know. I'm just trying to get a sense of the dynamic. Yeah, well, because, the NHL Golden Seals weren't terribly successful themselves. And so you kind of hit the nail on the head there with the young players, is the IHL Seals were very young. But it didn't seem like there was a real plan anywhere. So they brought these guys in and said that they were going to have this really good competitive team. Well, they started out like 1-19 and were just abysmal. And then you have the general manager saying, well, it looks like we underestimated the strength of this league. Well, you didn't really do your homework, did you? So not a whole lot of kudos for the scouting department. So they were just sort of left to be manhandled by a lot of these other veteran teams and better stocked teams. Yeah,
and the fans kind of responded accordingly, right? I think they only really had in 71, I guess, only one crowd over 2,000 fans, and a bunch that were even less than 1,000.
Bad in attendance, and they also didn't market it well. They didn't like any other team there, they didn't get good dates, but they didn't market it well. And another thing with Columbus is they had the Buckeyes, man, and we can at least see some measure of winning if we go watch a Buckeye basketball game or football game. But this is not. It's not fun to see your squad get slaughtered, 7-1 every night on a cold Tuesday in January. So a lot of that was happening, but a lot of another major factor was that he didn't invest in that team in particular.
We're talking Charlie Finley now, let's be honest, right?
Correct. But, you kind of think like, well, he did invest on the Athletics, and they did quite well, and he was willing to spend money there. But I had one former player, which I didn't get to fit into the movie, tell us that they were so bereft that they went on a road trip and had to borrow sticks from the opposing team and go to the sporting goods store in town and purchase their own sticks just to have sticks to play with on this road trip. That their equipment was that poor and ill prepared, I guess.
Well,
so that was what they were living with.
Do I have this right that even after that sort of first season with Terry Gray at the helm, 15-55 with 2 ties, right? So what is that? That's barely. I'd say it's like 220 something in terms of winning percentage. They brought back Mo Bartoli for the next season. Kind of maybe, I don't know, bring back some of that. I don't know, that checkers magic.
Checkers magic, the fire, and he was more now he was just the coach and general manager, and he was beloved in Columbus. And so they thought, well, maybe we'll get Mo back, and they brought a guy named Bill Bond in, who had played for the Checkers, a real steady big defenseman. And I think he had been maybe in Des Moines or something, and he wanted to get back to Columbus. So Mo brought him back to Columbus and made him the captain and everything. And so you're thinking, with these changes, things are going to get better, right? Well, no, they got worse, historically worse, if you can believe it. And they ended up in the 72-73 season with 62 losses. And that record is into perpetuity when the league folded in 2001.
Yeah, it's one of the more futile seasons, I guess in I don't know, minor league hockey or pro hockey generally, right? 10 wins out of a 74 game season. That's 62 losses and 2 ties. I can't imagine. Now the logo, again, I come back to the iconography and the logos. The Seals stuff was cool too. So in the graphic design department, and not another good kind of standout look, I think is cool. It just had to be just a futile effort to be a fan and or a player and or a coach or anybody associated with this team for 2 years.
Yeah, it did. I mean, your final line was 10, 62, and 2 with a winning percentage of 1.49. And they were outscored by like 216 goals, I think, or something like that. Just totally abysmal. And Bill Bond, who was the captain of that team, he told me, he said, if I would have known it was going to be like that, I would have never gone. So that was pretty telling.
And would you describe basically the players that you interviewed or knew about sort of as part of at least these 2 years as being, obviously it seems to be sort of on the young side and more developmental side, but I'm guessing all of these players, and obviously a lot of them didn't have a choice in many respects, were kind of hoping to get a look upstairs at the Oakland franchise, right? Versus sort of making a go out of it as a full-time IHL, rock'em sock'em player.
Yeah, that would have been hard to be a veteran player playing in that. And if you were a younger guy, at least you could say, well, this isn't my last stop, my last stand. I can keep pushing, but I forget which season of what it was, 71 or 72, but one of the players, and it's in the movie where he's quoted as saying, the best thing that ever happened to me was I broke my nose or broke my arm that season, and I was out for the season. It was like that was the attitude, because it was just so difficult to get through with that chronic losing.
So how does Finley get out of this then? And do you have any ideas to sort of like why? I'm trying to remember where the Golden Seals NHL club was at this time. He was probably trying to get out for a bunch of different reasons that had maybe nothing specifically to do with Columbus per se, or maybe it did. I don't know.
Right. I think he was just losing interest in hockey in general and was trying to invest more in the Oakland Athletics. He did put some good money into them. And they almost kind of succeeded in spite of him, but he did spend money with them. And that was what the new owner, the Columbus Owls owner, said. Was he was asked so he just purchased the franchise from Finley, a guy by the name of Al Savill, and he was asked what he would do differently, and he said get better players and spend more money. So that was his plan of action from the start.
And I guess treat it like a competitive entity, because the IHL obviously was, at certain level was competitive in the cities that it played in. Well, how does this transaction come to be? Like, how does Savill get knowledge of it? What's his background? And is this a Finley finding Savill kind of thing? Is this an IHL led process? How does this sort of transaction occur? I'm just curious as to like how the team goes from one lamentable and looking to get rid of owner to another.
Yeah, so Finley had just lost interest and wanted to get out of the hockey business in general, and so he put the team up for sale. And I believe Bill Began, who was the commissioner of the IHL, somewhat facilitated the sale to Al Savill, who was a very successful mortgage broker executive and had made a lot of money in that industry. But he was also a very competitive man. He had owned a minor league football team in Indianapolis in the late 60s in the, what was the Continental League, I believe.
League, yes.
Yeah. And actually won the championship one year. So he was a competitive guy, and he was a wealthy guy, and he had a plan and a vision, and he didn't like to lose.
Yeah, I think I have this right. If Savill, and I apologize for pronouncing his name incorrectly earlier, but Savill, if I have this right, I think even made an entreaty at one point to O.J. Simpson when he was having a contractual disagreement with the Buffalo Bills.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's pretty wild.
Yeah, apparently to play for, I guess, that team in Indianapolis, was it? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, it was Indianapolis. It was the Indianapolis Capitals.
There you go. And OJ is still with us. I don't know if it's an appropriate outreach to ask him about that little blip in his career. But I digress. But yeah, it does give a sense that at least on a minor league level, he wanted to be somewhat competitive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you could just see in the research that he was a competitive guy in everything he did. So he spent money. He spent money on the facility, and he got a really good working agreement, an affiliation with the St. Louis Blues, and was able to bring in some nice players from their camp, and had a pretty darn good team for putting it together in the course of 3 months. And that was a good team in 73, 74, actually.
He also, though, went on to, I know we're sort of getting ahead of ourselves on the Owls. Owls was the 73 to 78, but this is also around the time, if I'm not mistaken, Savill also tried to get involved and or was a part owner of the Pittsburgh Penguins in the NHL too, right?
Yeah, he sure was. I believe it was the last 2 years of the Columbus Owls. He also was a part owner of the Pittsburgh Penguins in the NHL, and then used Columbus as an affiliate.
Got it. Okay, so there was a relationship. That's what I was trying to get to. So in essence, the Owls were now again. Owls again have fantastic graphic imagery. So when we post this episode and on our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com, we'll have a whole bunch of these images, and obviously in our social media feeds, which most of our listeners have probably seen, and maybe the reason why they're listening to this episode, I hope. So the Owls feel to me like, okay, the Checkers, kind of came and went. It died an ugly death. And then Finley, for whatever he was trying to do, sort of didn't make a go at it. It seems to me like Savill really kind of made a serious go at it with this team as in the incarnation as the Owls, in terms of competitiveness and play and commitment and spending of money, and even an affiliation with a team that he even had a part ownership stake in with the NHL.
Yes, he wanted to win. He wanted to win, whether it was at the minor league level or the major league level. And a lot of the people that I interviewed who played for him or worked in the front office, that was what they said. They said he wanted to win, and he also treated us well, and he got us anything we needed to help us be better and help us win. That was never a question. He treated us well. And a few of the guys said, you could never ask for a better owner than Mr. Savill. And he would personally have them out to his house for Christmas parties and get them gifts and all of that. And he wanted them to do well because he wanted to do well. And I think it was all just simpatico. And he was, like I said, a competitive guy. He had been that way in business, and he was in that way in his sports ownership too. And that also came to bear in his dealings with the state and the Fairgrounds Coliseum. He would not back down.
Well, so describe that to me. I'm guessing this is just part of being an owner of a Columbus team and the IHL. I guess I'm always curious as to why the IHL generally, and why not spend more time and energy with the Penguins and the NHL. But describe again. I think it's important to understand the relationship between the various teams, inclusive of the Owls, and we also hinted at the Chill, and this Fairgrounds Coliseum facility. Maybe a moment or two about the facility itself, right? Because I don't know if it's charming, but it certainly was long in the tooth even then, I guess.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I think it's 102 years old now or something like that, and they're still using it and still playing hockey in there at different levels. But it was just a state-run operation, and they weren't especially proactive, forward-thinking. Things wouldn't get done, and Savill would go in there and, as a businessman, as a business owner, and a successful one, and just say, "Hey, this isn't cutting it. We need to do this, this, and this," and then they wouldn't react or respond. So he would get in disputes with them and say he wasn't going to pay the rent for the month, and just really try to force their hand, and they just wouldn't really play ball. They liked it the way they liked it, and they had it their way, and that was the way they did things. And it was exceptionally frustrating for all three ownership groups. Not so much as Finley, but I know the Schmeltzers had that frustration. And Savill, he did not hold back in laying into them at any given situation.
It feels to me, though, that is this feeling correct that there was more of a marketing push here and more of an outlay of effort to sort of draw attention to the team and get people to come, and the logo and all that stuff?
Yeah, there was. I had mentioned that he spent money. He spent money marketing. He spent money in outreach. And he also had some really popular players. Mo Bartoli came back, and he was the coach and general manager for a few years. Mo was the man.
What is it about Mo? What is it about him?
I think Mo kind of figured out that he could be a big fish in a medium-sized pond, and there was just an affection for him in Columbus because of the way he carried himself, the way he coached, the way he played. People actually saw him play. He wouldn't back down to anybody, and he played hard, and he was always a good quote. I think he was very good with the media, and he won. He won to some degree, not a lot, but he could get you a pretty good team, and they were always fun teams to watch. But then he also had this incredible pipeline to really good players from his hometown of Sudbury, Ontario.
Yeah,
if you look at the rosters, he's
like he was kind of like the face of hockey in the city, and it's just ironic because he was part of one of the worst teams ever in Columbus minor league franchise history prior to that. So
yeah, he was the coach of the most dubious team ever as far as losses go. Yeah. But he had proved himself a little bit with the Checkers and with other teams as being pretty favorable. And I don't know, people just liked him, and they still to this day refer to him as the godfather of Columbus hockey. So that's a pretty neat claim. Pretty good moniker to wear.
So describe to me, I mean, we're sort of hinting at it with the always friction-filled relationship with the Fairgrounds Coliseum folks. Despite all of that and the alliance with the Pittsburgh Penguins, which I know obviously it was around the time when the infamous sort of padlocking by the IRS it seems to me that his involvement with the Penguins around that time sort of kept that franchise viable for the time he was part of it, even though it was money losing. What was the straw that kind of broke his camel's back, so to speak? At what point does the enterprise in Columbus kind of start to sort of waver and his conviction in this team waver too?
Yeah, well, after year 3, towards the end of that year, he was not even hinting, he was actually saying in the media that this is probably going to be our last year unless things change. And a lot of that was he was fed up with dealing with the Fairgrounds Coliseum. He also didn't see the business community embracing them like he thought they could and should, and just felt like they weren't being treated like the way he thought that they could be treated, as far as a relatively decent, popular team in a city of that size. And so he was just trying to push the envelope a little bit. But they had built a pretty good fan following. And so with that veiled threat or whatever, the Booster Club got to work and really started to secure season tickets and wanted to bring the team back and assure that. So he acquiesced and did bring them back for the 4th season, but it became it's in the movie, it just became an absolutely untenable relationship with the Fairgrounds Coliseum management, and he just had enough.
Well, how early did he start to, if you will, threaten to go to another city?
Year 3, toward the end, probably about 2/3 of the way through the year, he had a press conference and made that proclamation. And so that got people's attention, and he met with civic leaders and the mayor and all that, and got some, I guess, positive momentum and positive press, and maybe even some financial assistance along the way from that, and did come back for a 4th season. But I just think he had lost so much money over the course of his 3 years that he was also quoted as saying, "I don't want to make money, but breaking even wouldn't be bad," and he professed that he had lost like $200,000. And just, I don't know if you've ever run a business, but just because you have it doesn't mean you want to lose it. So,
well, where did he want to go?
He had talked about possibly relocating to Grand Rapids initially, which is where they did end up. But then after the 76-77 season, they did a very bizarre thing when the Dayton Gems were no longer there, and they moved to Dayton for I'm talking maybe 3 or 4 weeks, and then they relocated to Grand Rapids and stayed in Grand Rapids for a number of years under his ownership.
Well, it sounds like a real sort of shot in the gut if you were one of the 2,000 to 3,000 or so fans rattling around the Fairgrounds arena, to sort of see yet now the 3rd attempt at a minor league franchise to kind of stick. It also feels to me too that again, the ownership of the arena, I mean, it doesn't help matters, right? Because I get the sense that while the team did perform pretty well and made the playoffs a bunch of times, it was always those dates. It seemed like they had to kind of every spring had to sort of acquiesce to the previously arranged. I mean, they could never catch a break, come playoff time, and they had to scramble. And I just had to be maddening to run a franchise that way, especially given the more important games near the end of the season.
Yeah, it was, for Mr. Savill himself, and actually investing his own money in the Coliseum in different ways, and really trying to bring attention to the team and building a winner and bringing in interesting personalities. And, they started to get pretty hot there in the playoffs in 76-77. Well, they had to play the bulk of their playoff series in Toledo and ended up losing a Game 7, which would have been a home game, in Toledo, and then that was the end of it. And I think that was just the last straw of, gosh, I'm not going to tolerate this anymore. I've tried and I've done my best, but they don't want to work with us, so I'm going to move it on down the line.
And I guess this is also interesting. We mentioned this before, and maybe this is a good coda to the story. Again, a reminder that this is around the same time that the Crusaders were the Barons. I apologize. The Crusaders were the earlier WHA incarnation, right? That was earlier part of the decade, but also the Barons in the NHL, the relocated Golden Seals for 2 seasons, and the Stingers in the flailing around the WHA as well. To their credit, trying to hang on admirably to be hopefully one of the chosen teams to kind of make that merger to the NHL, which they ultimately didn't. It doesn't seem to me that Ohio as a state for hockey was not fertile. It seems like it was absolutely capable and possible. And certainly, Lord knows how many attempts were being tried. But I guess you put this against the backdrop of this Columbus story. The 70s were a turbulent time, maybe the best of times and the simultaneous worst of times to be a hockey fan in the state of Ohio professionally.
Yeah, and anywhere in the USA, the latter part, let's say, of the 70s, the economics weren't good for anybody, unless you were just independently wealthy. I mean, there were all the energy shortages and the high inflation and the high interest rates and all of that. So it was tough. It was also tough to spend money on entertainment like that. But I really think if Mr. Savill would have given it another year or two, or would have been able to get a little bit of cooperation from the management of the arena, they would have stayed around, because they really had some popular players. There was a guy named Steve Lyon who was a fan favorite, and I've been in touch with. He lives up in Ontario now, but he had the wild man afro and big beard and played with tenacity, and just was a lot of fun. And then Wild Willie Trognitz played for the team, and even Bill Goldie Goldthorpe was invited to training camp. So the fans were dreaming of a team with Goldie and Wild Willie on it in 1976-77, but they didn't keep Goldthorpe, but just brought in some interesting players, some fan favorites, some very skilled players along the way. In fact, there was a pretty neat thing that the Owls had in 74, 75. They were the first professional team to ever have a line comprised strictly of collegiate American-born players, and they called it the BC line because all three of them had played together at Boston College. So that made a Hockey News headline. So it was a lot of interesting factoids and players came through, but the flint and stick never just struck to really build the fire.
Well, Trognitz is an interesting way to maybe sort of cul-de-sac this conversation, because he infamous, right, in IHL country. Once the team relocated, you want to maybe talk about sort of that, because he got the lifetime ban from the IHL. That's how bad it was.
Yeah, he did.
Reincarnated, strangely.
Yes, he did. Well, what was interesting is he was playing for Toledo, for the Toledo Gold Diggers, one of the greatest names of a team ever, on the Murder Inc. line. So, with Mahood and Tanardini. And then he was part of a trade, and he came over from the Gold Diggers already under suspension for attacking a referee. So that was his start in Columbus, coming with that dubious honor. But he was actually a pretty decent player. And then he did get a shot in the WHA later in his career.
He was suspended for life from the IHL. I guess it was a game against the Port Huron Flags, and I don't know if it was the inspiration for some of the scenes in Slapshot, but that movie was also out around that time, right? So in many respects, it almost was a boon to his sort of his career in some respects by getting that ban, because Lord knows the Stingers needed some help on the goon side of things, and it gave him another sort of a breath of life in another league, and strangely, a call up, because the WHA was effectively a direct competitor to the NHL at the time. It's just the craziness of these teams, the minor league hockey, certainly Slapshot around that time encapsulates some of it. Let me ask you sort of maybe this sort of roundup question, and then I'll let you promote. You're the kid now, sort of following this team, the Owls. How do you take their leaving? How do you discern and find out? And what are you told about them leaving? Like how is it described to you? How do you figure this out? And do you feel kind of abandoned, the fact that they're leaving town because of it?
Oh yeah. Well, like I said, I think earlier in our conversation I was, a junkie. I read every article and box score and followed them, listened to them on the radio, and was really part of their backers. I loved that team. I loved that team as much as I liked any of the other major league teams that I followed at the time, and a lot of it was because of their presence and the interesting players and their friendliness and approachability and all of that. So I was devastated. I really was. I forget, I was like 12 or something, I think, when they split, and it really, really hurt because it was my favorite sport. It was my favorite thing to do, and now they were gone, and I had invested in that emotionally, and they were just gone. So, I followed it in the papers and hoped that maybe they would come back or another team would come back in the ensuing years, and they didn't. And so I just, I guess I turned my interest to local college hockey there at Ohio State, and then played some, and then followed the NHL as much as you could on TV, and got the Hockey Digest or something. But yeah, it hurt. I was really pretty crestfallen over the whole thing.
Did you? You didn't even transfer allegiances to that of the Stingers, or even when they went to other cities like Dayton and Grand Rapids. You kind of just sort of, when they left Columbus, they left you.
Yeah, that was kind of how it felt. I think I might have followed Grand Rapids a little bit, but you got to remember they didn't really post IHL scores in the Columbus Dispatch when when the team was in Grand Rapids. So I knew they were there, and I knew some of the guys went, so I wanted them to do well. And I did follow the Stingers as much as I could, because they were on television some on a cable station out of Cincinnati that I watched. So, I did like that, and I loved watching the NHL when they were on the weekend games. But it just sort of became another hockey void there in Central Ohio.
Okay, and maybe this will be the last question, then I'll let you, I promise. So then, both as you lived through it and now as you look back in retrospect through this film, why, I think I know some of the answers, but why such a long gap then between the demise of the Owls, the return, the ballsy return, shall we say, of what became the Chill, and then obviously the lineage into NHL? Why that big gap, do you think, in hockey in Columbus?
Yeah, I think greater minds than mine have struggled with that. One thing that seemed to be pretty evident was word got out that the Fairgrounds Coliseum was difficult to deal with, and it was a one-way street. They did it their way, and you just sort of had to follow suit and fall in line. I believe that there was also the fact that there wasn't really another alternative place to play. They built a conference center at one point, and there was talk of something going in there, but to get a deal done there, I think, was difficult, and you had to build a whole ice plant and everything, and that's a major investment, especially for a minor league team. So I don't know. I kind of moved on. I graduated high school and went on to college, and followed hockey there and stuff too. But I was elated when the Chill did come, because I thought Columbus was ready for it, and I was excited for them to rejuvenate the hockey market there in Columbus. But just as they were coming in, I was moving away. So I don't know. I just think that it was an amalgam of things. I also think that people saw three teams tried, different types of ownership groups tried, and it didn't really take off. So we're not going to do it either. Sort of seemed to be the answer, I guess.
Well, yeah, and you also got on with your life, which is understandable too. But it must have been a part of you that was enthusiastic about the Chill and how quickly they kind of took not only the city by storm, but also got a lot of national accolades for their promotional prowess and stuff. I mean, they made the best of a bad situation there too, right? And obviously we see that ultimately became.
Yeah, I loved it. When I would come back for Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever, I'd grab some friends and we'd go and watch that brand of hockey and drink a beer and enjoy it. Still back in the same barn and and get the feels all over again. And they did. They got pretty famous actually, and it made me proud.
And did you transfer your hockey fandom to the Blue Jackets once they finally came, or do you not have as much of an affinity for them?
Yeah, that's kind of a complex answer, but yes, for the most part, yeah, because that was one of my dreams as a child. I can't even imagine how great would that be to have my hometown have an NHL team. And sure enough, it actually came true, and I never thought it would. But I had developed a real affection for the St. Louis Blues and had also had the opportunity to live out in St. Louis and go to Blues games when Brett Hull and Brendan Shanahan and Grant Fuhr and Wayne Gretzky and those guys played for the team. So that really solidified my liking of that squad. And so when Columbus did get the Blue Jackets and they did the divisions, they put the Blues and the Blue Jackets in the same division. And that made for some tough love. That was a difficult decision. So it's kind of a 1A, 1B type of feeling, I think.
Well, the reason why I asked it, because this leads into promoting the film, because, again, I circle back to the history of Columbus and pro hockey, right, is absolutely enmeshed in, whether we like it or not, or whether the team likes it or not, with the Blue Jackets franchise. And I wonder, with the arrival of this film and your promotion of it and all that other stuff, and frankly, you're not the only person in the Columbus area who remembers any of these three teams, I'm sure, or four teams if you throw the Chill in. When, where, and how does that, I don't know, respect, or at least memory and or just acknowledgement possibly come? Because I would suggest it's not unimportant.
Well, hopefully now, because when we actually premiered the film live in January, we went to a theater there in Grandview, Ohio, outside of Columbus, very close to downtown. And we had back-to-back sellouts. We had 11 former players come in from those teams, from as far away as Winnipeg and Florida and Ontario, and they brought their families, and we had the two sellouts, and the Hockey Hall of Fame was even in attendance, and they brought some of the IHL hardware, which was a lot of fun. And I think it really let a lot of people relive yesteryear, but also some of the families came up to me afterwards. One particular young man came up to me and said, "Eric, that was awesome. I never got to see my dad play. Now I did." That really was something for me to get to see him play when we had used some of that archival footage and stuff. And so now I think it's I think created a newfound interest in these teams that languished and were forgotten for so long, and we're bringing them back. And I've built a pretty good following on our Facebook page, and we're getting ready to release the film online here next month. And so I think we're bringing back the bringing back the ghosts. And to the Blue Jackets, they were actually kind enough. The premiere weekend, our group went to a Blue Jackets game, and they got a hold of me and wanted to run the trailer during a timeout. And they did that and interviewed me, and I took 2 of the former checkers down with me, and the entire place, sold out crowd on a Saturday night, gave them a standing ovation, and they were just over the moon, which made it all worthwhile.
So that's a happy ending, I guess, to a story. Maybe the beginnings of more, because we've had many chats about teams, various sports and leagues and stuff, where past histories have either been blatantly forgotten or just blithely discarded, or other sometimes even appropriated without sort of understanding sort of the background and or acknowledging sort of where that original logo or team name came from. They just sort of took it and moved on with it, right? So this feels to me like a little bit of acknowledgement. And I'm sure the NHL has its, again, issues and stuff, but I think you've hit a nice vein here, and it would seem to me that there's maybe some more to come in terms of memories and logos and all that kind of stuff. Not just because of this film, but because of the memories that this film is stirring up.
Yeah, and it has. It's stirred up some wistfulness with people. It's fun for the people who got to go see the games and remember that, or going with their family or their spouse or whatnot. And then it's also regenerated an enthusiasm for the players' families. That a few of them brought their families, and I mentioned Steve Lyon. He brought his 2 sons. They never got to see their dad play, and we hung out with them at one evening after the show, and they were just such nice young men, and I asked them, I said, did you know that your dad was kind of the man? They're like, yeah, we kind of knew, but like this really kind of showed us this is what he was. So people get to see their fathers or grandfathers or uncles or whomever in some capacity in their playing days.
All right, let's put a push pin in this conversation and remind you, Columbus hockey fans, if you were a fan of the Chill, if you are a fan of the Columbus Blue Jackets, you will, or if you even remember any of these teams we talked about this week, the Checkers, the Golden Seals, or the Owls, all of the IHL, you will absolutely love the upcoming documentary that Eric has put together. It is called International Incidents. It debuts on October 15th on Vimeo. As Eric has said, it is 80 minutes of old-time hockey gold, and you will not be disappointed. We loved it, and you will too. You can follow all of the exploits, the days leading up to the debut of this film, get specifics on how to get it, how to find it, how much it'll cost, and all that kind of stuff. No live events, unfortunately, in the interim, but it will be debuting online, and I know a lot of people will be excited about it. You can follow Eric on Twitter at @eWeltner. That's EWELTNER, eWeltner, at eWeltner. On Twitter, you can also follow International Incidents on Facebook. There's a Facebook page there, and either of those 2 places, you'll be able to find all of the latest information about the film. I think he's also on IMDb as well for the film, but just keep tabs on any of those places. But again, October 15th on Vimeo, International Incidents. You will enjoy it. Please seek it out. It is just a blast, and we wish Eric well with it. And I hope, God forbid, the Blue Jackets will take some notice of this film and do the right things and do a little bit more to the extent that they've done anything to commemorate not only these 3 great teams of the IHL, but the Chill, of course, as we talked about in our episode 169 a few months back. Great logos, great imagery, great memories, and frankly, a foundational history that the Columbus Blue Jackets and the NHL need to bow humbly in the general direction of, to thank, frankly, for the existence today of one of the NHL's fun franchises in the Blue Jackets. So thank you, Columbus. I think we've done you proud these last couple of weeks. And we wish you and the Blue Jackets well. And remember, knock on their doors early and often to get those checkers and golden seals and owls and even chill memories more regularly installed into what I hope is an actual in-person season coming up as the fall and winter perhaps lead us to hopefully once again. We want to thank, of course, all of our great sponsors. Our new pals at 417helmets.com. Thank you, Judd. We want to thank our pal Jerry Payne, of course, who painstakingly, hint, hint, wink, wink, puts all of our pieces together. Thank you, sir, for your editing and production talents. Jerry Payne, audio excellence, of course. And if you want to follow us on Twitter, you can do that at Good Seats Still. You can follow us on Instagram at Good Seats Still Available. Yes, there's a Facebook page devoted to us too at Good Seats Still Available. I think is the hashtag or something, whatever. Just search it up. You'll find it. And of course, our website, goodseatsstillavailable.com. That's where you can send us email or directly at hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. You could sign up for our email newsletter there. And I don't know, just to download all of our episodes if you want. We've got scores and scores of them. We're getting close to 200 now, and it's been almost 3.5 years worth of stuff, and we're not done yet for sure. So we thank you for checking all of those things out, following us where you can, and of course, please, wherever you can, Apple or elsewhere, how about a nice 5-star rating and a nice little, couple of words of thanks and thumbs up and what you like about the show. You can always use a few good reviews. That helps a lot of people out there, maybe like you, to find and discover this show for themselves. We thank you in advance for doing that. And we thank you in advance for hanging in there with us. And we'll talk to you next week, hopefully, God willing, with a brand new episode. Who knows what we'll be talking about, but you sure as hell know it'll be fun and exciting and hopefully something you never heard before. Take care, everybody. And until then, take good care of yourselves. Bye-bye.